Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the CRM podcast. I am your host, Gus Gonzalez, and this week we're going to be talking about part 2 of my review of businessThink, a book that I started reviewing on the last episode of the podcast. If you haven't listened to that, I would please ask you to stop right here and go back and listen to that episode because I will give you a good context about what we're going to be covering today. Today, we're going to be covering the last 4 rules that are described on the book businessThink, a book that I mentioned on part 1, on the last episode, that was really transformational in terms of how I approach solution architecture and how I talk to customers, literally, and how I essentially design solutions in Dynamics 365. This is not a technical episode either. This is more of a continuation on, becoming a better solution architect, becoming a better CRM administrator, a better business person, or a better even functional consultant. So anyone can take the rules that we're talking about, because the book is not a Dynamics 365 book. Anyone can take the things that we're covering in this episode and apply them to, whatever it is that they do within the organization. If they're project managers, salespeople, whatever it is, you can take the lessons that we talk about in here and apply them to your own day-to-day life. So on part 1, we talked about the first 4 rules of businessThink. And I wanted to focus on what happens after you start collecting evidence, which is what we talked about in rule number 4. So in rule number 4, if you remember, we closed the episode last by talking about soft evidence versus hard evidence and what questions and kind of how we can have a conversation that will allow us to essentially probe for information, right? Get that evidence that we're looking for. We're looking for that hard evidence, which is, never going to just come back immediately. It's something that you have to kind of work hard for in order for you to get it. But what happens once you get it? Well, let's go back to the book and talk about rule number 5. Rule number 5 is calculate the impact, right? So again, we're talking about, we have collected the soft evidence, we have converted that into hard evidence, and now what? Well, back to the book. When you convert hard evidence into impact, it answers the questions, well, how big is the impact if you decide to do something about it, right? So we have this hard evidence, we know the pains, we can see the gains. These are the things that people expect to get from this solution. Well, how big will the impact be if we decide to do something about it, if we decide to implement a solution for it? And what is it costing you by not solving the problem? That is also another one that is important. And this happens a lot in projects, by the way, just getting off the book for a second. This happens a lot in projects too, where people don't see the value of what they don't have. It's hard to sell. And sometimes I feel for some of the customers that we talk to, for example, I'm sure you guys listening to this, if you implement Dynamics for a living, you also go through this, because customers are sort of like, I kind of see the value, but I cannot sell it to the leadership of my company because this is not something that we have, right? It's hard to ask for budget and time and effort and the pain of going through the adoption and training of another solution when it's essentially I'm pitching this solution to, eliminate or to eliminate the cost of not solving a problem that perhaps nobody else, can seem to see. So if the problem is never fixed, then what happens, right? That is the question that we're trying to ask here. Back to the book. If you never adopt this strategy, what are the implications? If everything goes right, so the best case scenario, what do we gain from it? It is the justification that proves you should act. Of all the things you could do, this better be something you should pay attention to in terms of time, people, money, etc. If the payoff doesn't justify the attention, then don't do it. If the payoff is equivalent to little tremors people barely will notice and nobody will care about, then don't bother. You are, after the impact, short and long term, direct an opportunity tangible and intangible, right? We have to be, and this is me talking, we have to be after the impact that this solution will bring in the short and the long term, the direct and the opportunity, right? The direct impact that it's going to have and the opportunity for something better, and tangible and intangible value as well. That's why you hardwire the measurable alert into your nervous system. When you actually have evidence, whether it's hard or soft, convert the evidence into impact. That is how you sell a solution. That is how you kind of implement a solution. And ultimately, when it comes to calculating the impact of the evidence that you have, we're after the 5 golden questions. Back to the book. When you hear or offer something you can measure that is directly related to what you want to prevent or invent, your measurable alert should go off. And you can ask these 5 important questions that will convert hard evidence into impact. So this is it. This is how we do it. Question number 1, how do you measure it? Right? How do we measure that hard evidence that we're talking about? Because if you can measure it, you will know what impact you had. Question number 2, what is it now? What's the value now? What is it that we're looking at right now? Let's say if we go back to some of the examples we covered on the previous episode, and the idea was, well, product defects are sky high or whatever it is. As you probe for information, well, how do we measure that? Number 1, and what's the value right now? Question number 3, what would you like it to be? Right? You're talking to somebody within this project. We're trying to sell a solution, whatever it is. Well, what's the value right now? And what would you like it to be? This is question number 4, what is the value of the difference? So right now is this. You like it to be that. What's the value? Well, what is it that we're going to gain from that? And that is question number 5. What's the value of the difference over time? Whether it is in months, years, whatever it is, the appropriate management horizon, right? So let's talk about, a real world example of how these questions will pan out if you follow them. For example, imagine that you're the director in a travel services company. During a strategy meeting, one of your colleagues from client services brings an idea to the table. So here's what your colleague says. Moving our travel services online would make it easier for our customers to purchase by giving them better, faster access and would increase our market share. Now you should ask something like this. Okay, how do you measure market share, by the way, for this particular product that you're talking about? Your colleague may say something like, well, it's the percent of market ownership for corporate travel clients. Well, what is it now? It's roughly 8%. Okay, what would you like it to be once you've been giving them, that better, quicker access online? Well, it's 12%. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so what does each 1% market share equate to in financial terms? Your colleague may say something like, well, it's about $3 million in revenue, give or take 5%. Oh, okay. So if you want to move from 8 to 12%, you're talking about $8 to $12 million opportunity? Yeah, roughly, your colleague says. Okay, so since our strategic plan covers the next 3 to 5 years, and we're realistically looking at $36 to $48 million in this opportunity by doing this, right? Your colleague will say, well, we hadn't run those numbers yet, but I would be surprised if marketing and IT couldn't get behind that figure. Now, this example is pretty simple, but you get the idea. And, when the value of the difference is immediately apparent in money, you can drop the question, what's the value of the difference? For example, in this case, you can see the numbers are so high that it's a big difference, right? Here's another example. One of your colleagues from sales makes an observation in our conversation. He says, okay, hey, not having account management software is hurting sales. Well, what are sales now? It's 500 million. Okay, so let's say we had account management software that was really doing the job. What would we expect sales to be then? Like 550 million. Okay, So over the next 3 to 5 years, you'll be looking at revenue growth from 150 to 250 million. Now, the real art form is in quantifying the impact when the value of the difference is not immediately apparent in dollars. This will require you to ask a few more questions that may not be as apparent and easy. For instance, if someone believes the key issue is quality, let's just play this example. So we say something like, how do you measure quality, by the way? Your colleague will say something like, well, it's the number of rejections per 1,000 units. Okay. What is the current rejection rate? Well, it's about 10 per 1,000 units. Okay. Let's say we were successful with this, this project. What would you expect it to be? They say, 5, like half per 1,000 units. And what's the value of the difference? Well, it's big bucks. It's a lot of money. That's a problem. You have just asked the other person to do a lot of math in their head, and they may not be able to. So you need to chunk it down and take it one step at a time together, right? The idea is you are looking for that information that you need in order to measure impact. We need to convert the hard evidence from just being, again, just evidence into what impact is it going to have for the organization. And I do that all the time in projects, like all the time. People will say something like, we need to make sure that our software communicates with, XYZ system, whatever it is, our ERP system or whatever it is. And I'm going to ask why. Right? What is the impact to the business that we're going to gain from this? Now, sometimes the answers are pretty straightforward. They're really easy to determine. Like, having the connection will prevent us from, making mistakes and sending products to customers that owe us money and things like that. And we're talking about millions of dollars in revenue that are lost every year because of the lack of communication between ERP and CRM, let's just say. Okay, those are easy. But in some cases, you ask some questions like that, and the value is not that simple. One good example is portals, for example. So you say, well, our customers, would benefit from having a portal where they could log in and, submit cases and ask questions and things like that. And then you start thinking about, well, how much does a portal will cost and what is the impact in business? And as you start digging in, you realize that in terms of business, your customers will submit, the cases probably the same way they've been doing it before, which is calling salespeople. And you're about to spend, whatever it is, $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, whatever it is, the cost it is of the portal. Plus, every time those users log in, or those customers rather log in, you will have to pay for that portal, for those logins essentially based on today's licensing details essentially. So you're talking about a lot of money that perhaps the initial intent was not only will make it easier for the users, but we also don't have to have, many people, be there picking up the phone. So if you're going to, let's say, get rid of or decrease the amount of people you have answering the phone because now people are going to go to a portal, well, what's the difference? So if you're going to save, let's say, $200,000 a year or $300,000 a year in salaries of people that were answering the phone for clients by implementing a portal that costs $280,000 a year to maintain, and perhaps even more since it can, it has to be upgraded and you have to, stay on top of it and all of that. You don't have to do that with a phone system as often as you have to do it with a portal for a variety of reasons. Then probably the cost doesn't make sense. The implementation of the solution doesn't make sense. And I see it time in and time out where partners and solution architects implement solutions that will not make a difference at all. It will actually cause pain for customers. And it's like, it doesn't matter. As long as they're paying me, I'll do it. And we will talk about this today. We will talk about getting labeled and kind of doing their own work. But if you think about it, once again, the first rule that we covered today is rule number 5. Rule number 5 is about converting, right, the hard evidence into impact. Calculate the impact of the solution they are going to implement in terms of the evidence that you have and what will be the effect on the actual company. Now, let's move into rule number 6. Rule number 6 is explore the ripple effect. What does that mean? Let's go back to the book. When exploring a problem or an opportunity, calculating the impact gives you a financial number to assess the value of a solution. However, the financial impact only represents the effect on one part of the company, which is, the actual part of the company involved in the project. Like sometimes you will do a project that it's only, let's say, for the customer service team or for the sales team or a specific office or a country or a division within the company, whatever it is, right? So if you're thinking about the financial impact, you're only thinking about that specific part of the company that is involved in the project. Back to the book. Even though it's important to you, it is only one piece of the puzzle. Rarely does a problem or opportunity only affect one person or department or part of the company. Imagine throwing a rock into the middle of a pond. It makes a splash and it sinks, and the ripples move farther and farther out. The same thing applies to most problems or opportunities in a company. Every company has an explicit or implicit mission, values, and key strategies or initiatives that are imperative to the growth and survival of the company. To that degree that you understand how, what you're trying to solve fits into that bigger picture, the eventual solution will help meet company-wide goals, tie into objective of other departments and people, and help generate results for the entire company, not just the functional few. Exploring the ripple effect will give you the tools to widen your functional lens and capture the bigger picture and the broader impact of problems or opportunities on the company. It will also provide a way to make sure you know who or what else in the company is affected by the moves that you make beyond the functional silo, cubicle walls, or an organization chart structures that you happen to be working with on that specific project. So that is what we're talking about in terms of ripple effects. And it's always interesting, working with solution architects sometimes, and even with organizations sometimes that are not thinking beyond, let's say, phase 1. They're not thinking about how the decisions that we make in this project can jeopardize essentially decisions that or things that we want to implement later. It's always interesting to see that. And sometimes because I like to look into the future and think about, okay, this is where we want to be next year or whatever it is, sometimes I get in trouble with customers because, we get into this battle of this is what we want now. And because I'm looking into the future, I'm saying we can't do it that way, right? We can't do it that way because if you ever want to do X, you won't be able to do it. And some customers don't like that. But I think that, again, that's what they hire me for, to be their consultant and to be their expert, is to keep them out of trouble in a lot of cases, right? And to kind of have a good dialogue back and forward, between us, essentially, and, advise them correctly. So let's talk about ripple effect. Back to the book. You, like every business person on the planet, are often limited by the functional dialect on your native tongue in your isolated role. Separated by degrees, certificates, and cubicle walls, it is essential to consider who or what else is potentially affected by the issues at hand. And it's interesting, like I work in projects where, one department will be asking for a modification to, let's say, the security structure of Dynamics or business units or entities. Like, no, this is what we need in the account. And, but there's also 18 other divisions that use the account entity, right? So it's always important to keep that in mind. Keep the fact that the company's bigger than whoever you're working with. Unless you're in a really, really small company where you kind of know everybody and you're implementing Dynamics for everybody. Typically, when you do things in Dynamics, they will be affecting others that you're not directly working with. Here's an example. Bright human resources people know their own stuff. Recruiting, compensation, learning, culture, benefits, safety, labor law, talent, and, etc. Now, they're up on all the latest human resource thinking and innovation published by other well-known human resources people. Clearly, their approach to solutions will have that human resource bias. When you're focused solely on your craft, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture of the business. If you don't understand how others will define success, you may get the results you want, but not the results anyone else wants or needs. The functional assumption becomes that this is just a group issue and nobody else is affected, which is always wrong, by the way. Or you may feel that you know better than others and everyone will dig this. After all, what is good for human resources, or whatever other department of your choice, must be good for everybody. So if it's good for HR, it's good for everybody. Is it? Who or what else in the company is affected by the current problem or the opportunity under consideration? That is the question, right? That is the question that you need to ask yourself, because you often think like those who surround you and act on what you think. Your group develops its own secret language that nobody else really understands, and your solutions are designed to meet your needs and nobody else's needs. But when you implement a solution like Dynamics 365, that's not the case. In a lot of cases, the entire company, meaning other divisions, other countries, other places, will actually use that same solution. We want Dynamics to be our one version of the truth, right? So because of that, you have to keep that ripple effect in mind. As a solution architect specifically, think about future plans. If you know they're going to be implementing mobility, in the future, maybe this team that you're working with, let's say it's HR, just to keep on the example that we just covered, maybe HR doesn't need mobile access, but you have to think about what some of the functionality you may be implementing for HR will do for the other teams that will need mobile access. businessThink is designed to overcome this functional tendency. It's not like people are trying consciously to hurt others or leave them out. The business lens functional people look through is focus, and while that focus picks up some cool images, is sometimes narrow, right? Or narrows their view and misses what's outside their functional frame. Misses what's outside their functional frame. They need both the functional close-up lens and the wide-angle business lens. As business people, don't mind your own business, mind the business. And I can repeat that as a solution architect. As a solution architect, don't mind your own business or your project, mind the entire solution or the entire implementation of Dynamics. Back to the book. The functional blindness can lead to the following problems. Number one, solutions that serve only a few local people and not the entire company. Man, how many times I've seen that before, where every division is operating in a silo and they could all be benefiting from solutions that, it will benefit all the divisions, but they don't because they're working in a silo, right? Missing strategic fit of solutions into major company initiatives. Confusion in weighting your priorities against other priorities going on within the company. Missing the full scope of the impact. Solving something that doesn't need to be solved, right? Just because one group is in pain doesn't mean that everyone else in the company is in pain. So that is kind of one thing to think about. In the book, they talk about, this backwards approach to architecting a solution or to tackling these issues, which is guilty until proven innocent. And this is what they say. It is difficult, if not impossible, to have or build a killer solution if you've never talked to all of the people who are currently being affected by the problem. The challenge, though, is that everyone is busy and you struggle to determine who or what else would be affected. And the addiction to speed doesn't help. As a result, what seems like a good decision to move forward with a solution ultimately blows up because a lot of seemingly good decisions explode upon implementations. Dysfunctional decision-making practices have arisen to combat the constant flow of dysfunctional projects and myopic solutions. The better you understand the ripple effect, the more likely it is you will have a solution that truly works for the whole company and that it is sustainable. Man, that's so good. Once again, it's hard to believe that this book is not about solution architecture because some of these statements fit so well with the way we work, right? I'll repeat this last one. The better you understand the ripple effect, the more likely it is you will have a solution that will truly work for the whole company and that it is sustainable. I mean, that's just awesome. For rule number 6. Now, there are some situations where you're working in projects or you're working with teams, and although you can see the impact, in other words, you take the hard evidence and you convert that into impact, the impact is small. So let's talk about that. As you look at the ripple effect, at any point in your discussions, anyone may reach the conclusion that the impact of the problem is not substantial. The financial value may not be great relative to the actual company's overall priorities, or all that impressive relative to the size of other divisional or functional goals. So there are other things going on in the company. Really? Do we have to focus on this? That happens a lot in projects, by the way, and working with customers. And it's always interesting when the customers kind of start arguing amongst themselves on what is valuable and what's not. Because some companies, I don't know if this happened to you in the past if you're an implementer, but sometimes companies are like, well, I know that this doesn't affect the company, but this division is responsible for 20% of the revenue of the company. So it must be important for the company, right? Well, is it? On a closer look, back to the book, maybe you would place your ideas on the lower end of a scale from 1 to 10. For whatever reason, if you sense that the opportunity either is not important or not urgent, you have a couple of choices. So, 1, you can move on to something else. 2, you can consider the worst case scenario of doing nothing, right? That is typically what I try to do is, okay, if we don't tackle this thing right now, what's the worst case scenario? Then what, right? We were just talking about that. And then what? So, sounds something like this. Here's an example. If this problem is only costing us $100,000 a year, the problem may be cheaper than the solution. Let's say we did nothing and watch this over the next couple of years. Would anyone even care? Could we live with that? Now, $100,000 a year is a lot of money depending on what company you are, right? If you are, I don't know, Nike, is it a lot of money? If you're McDonald's, is it a lot of money? It all depends. What kind of problem is it? Now, if this is only a 5, remember on the scale from 1 to 10, doesn't it seem likely that we could be better off spending our money on strategies that are 8, 9s, and 10s? I think so, right? So that is how you see that. So here's an example of that. Let's say you're consulting with the call center operations in your company, and you uncover the fact that there is 40% turnover in one of the call centers. So you have multiple call centers, and you realize that one of them has high turnovers. You also you do some research, and you find out that the industry standard, out there is 20% turnover. So in making your case, you will say something like this. Hey, I read somewhere that turnover for call center employees in our industry is roughly 20%, but we're currently around 40%. If the industry standard is really 20%, well, what's the impact of having 20% more turnover than our competition? Right? That's a question that you kind of propose to the business and essentially the people operating the call centers. Now, your colleagues or the people operating your call center can say something like, you know what? I don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, people who have been around for a long time become both like cynical and expensive. So, I actually like new people. New people are cheaper. They're more enthusiastic. We like the fact that we have 40% turnover. Now, you can leave it at that. And I think that a lot of people will leave it at that and be like, okay, cool. That's good to know. But remember, we're here to try to probe for gain and for pain as well. So instead of just leaving it at that, I think that a good question would say, you know what? Or a good statement will be, you know what? You might be right. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions, though, based on my experience and what I'm thinking about? Now, you can ask a few things here. You can ask them, how they feel about some of the following issues. Let's talk about some of the things that can come to mind. For example, and again, all of these issues are about kind of opening the eyes of colleagues in some cases, or customers. If you're working with customers, if you're a solution architect, I love to open the eyes, especially when I get to provide them with data that backs up my observations and my questions. So here's a couple of examples in our 40% turnover, maybe better than 20% industry turnover scenario. So here's one. This one is about reputation. Because of bad corporate reputation for losing so many people, is it harder to hire qualified people or quality people? That's a good question, right? Is the customer tired of dealing with someone new who perhaps doesn't understand our return policies? That's another good question to ask. Also, what's the cost to move people in and out of the company, in terms of paperwork and administrative costs? Is there enough time for new people to catch up and understand our products and services, and to generate maybe cross sales and upsell opportunities? That's another good question. Are there fewer experienced workers? Is there a less flexible workforce? Are there loss of production, or is there a loss of production because of that? Things like that. That's what I'm trying to understand, because of the the large turnover that we have. What are the costs of hiring agencies in company time that we have to be interviewing all these people, the 20% that we have higher than the industry? Are we paying higher unemployment taxes because of our turnover? Are we paying more to hire temps because we're short on the help that we are supposed to have? Are we experiencing more errors because of inexperience or disgruntled workers? These are all questions that are super important, that if you are not thinking in terms of business value, you would have left it at, we'd really like the people are enthusiastic, and I like they're newer and they're better. If you left it at that, you would have missed out on exploring some of these questions. Now, the coworker that said that they actually prefer it to be 40%, they can actually change their perception in how they're thinking about it. People could change their perception because of those questions that you asked, and also how you ask them as well. That's important. You may have an opportunity to help the company get a solution it really needs, not to mention other departments that could benefit from your thinking. Or they won't change their perception and you can move on. Functional expertise is vital, and with businessThink added to it, it becomes much more powerful and persuasive. So that is essentially how you can dig in and really look for value where it matters, right? Asking those questions. Oh yeah, people are newer and more excited to do the work. Well, let's explore these other costs. Is customer satisfaction being affected? Are we paying more taxes? What are some of the things that might be paying, instead of gain, which is we gain happy and enthusiastic employees, and how are they affecting the company? This is something that we should be focusing on right now. And that was rule number 6. Now we're entering into rule number 7. Rule number 7 is slow down for yellow lights. Now this one I've talked about before, and I didn't call it slow down for yellow lights. You could say that this is, raise the flag. In some cases is don't ignore the red flags. There are several ways to say this, but it always means the same thing. Let's talk about that. Back to the book. When you're considering the scope of a problem or the size of an opportunity, don't pretend that if you could craft a solution, you would somehow arrive in Happy Valley and would coast merrily down the path to success. Look ahead to what could go wrong, what or even who might be out there to get you. You'll need to look at any possible solution with your eyes wide open. What could sidetrack your efforts or shut down any solution down? The essence of slowing down for yellow lights is asking the hard question. What's the hard question, you may ask? if this is such a big deal, like imagine you're looking at a problem, right? Or a situation that you're trying to solve. Imagine asking yourself, if this is such a big deal, what has stopped this company from doing something about it before? Like, why now? Why didn't they solve this before? Seems like a big deal. Often, back to the book, when you're this close to having what you need to justify a solution, this question doesn't even occur to you. The addiction to speed begins to resurface. You start to realize you're close to making the pain of some problems go away, or you imagine the payoff of a new opportunity. Either way, you want to rush towards the excitement of building a solution, right? You want to just get past what could come back and bite me, right? What could come back and shut this solution? I don't even want to think about it. Let's just go, right? If the question does occur to you, you're often hesitant to ask it because you're afraid of what the answer may be, or you're afraid that it might prove to be a political landmine or a career limiting and sometimes actually ending inquiry. Again, we're talking about asking that question, if this is such a big deal, what has stopped this company from doing something about it until now? However, not asking that question may produce the same results you're scared of. For the sake of everyone involved, you will need to muster the courage to ask that hard question. Just ask in a soft way. When you slow down long enough to consider what has, will, or could stop any solution from working, you'll potentially save yourself a lot of wasted energy and improve the likelihood of success for the solution. And you may save the company valuable scarce resources. So, when you think about this tough question to ask, there are actually two vital questions that you will need to ask. One is, we already talked about it, what has stopped us from successfully doing something about this before now? That is question number one. Have you guys ever tried this? What stopped you from doing this? Why now? That's question number one. Question number two is there anything that can stop us in the future? Or what may stop us in the future? That is the second question that you have to answer. And it's all about getting real, right? And not playing around. Now, where does the concept of slow down for yellow lights coming in? Well, back to the book. When you're driving, especially when you're anxious to arrive somewhere important and you approach a yellow light, what do? Well, again, off the book. If you're like me, you floor it, right? You want to make it through. Back to the book. If you're like most people, you gun it to beat the light. A yellow light has become the universal symbol for speed up. Unfortunately, many people use the same response in business. They hear something that concerns them, see a reaction that could spell trouble, feel they're running into a snag, and they just speed up to avoid running into their own worst fears. When they think they see a big potential return of investment sign ahead, they're tempted to put the pedal to the metal. Ultimately, they are afraid that the light will turn red. The experience in business has convinced people that hitting a red light is failure. And so, when they see yellow, they close their eyes, they speed up, and they hope they can make it through. This is so important in projects as well. Sometimes you will find a yellow light, or sometimes you will find a red flag, however you want to call it. And all you want to do is put your head down and do work and worry about that later. It's happened to me in projects before where somebody is expecting a functionality that should be released on the next, upgrade from Microsoft on the next release. So we say, that functionality is really important and Microsoft should release it in 3 months or whatever. So let's just move forward and assume it's going to be released. That is a red flag. Or it will be, something else that will cause a concern and that people tend to, again, try to ignore it. But if you want to be a world-class solution architect, you have to deal with reality. We have to get real. Back to the book. if hitting a red light is unavoidable, hit it as soon as possible. The sooner, the better. Intellectually, people know that. Emotionally, they resist it, right? We know that if this is going to fail, if there's a red light, if there's going to be a problem, intellectually, you say, let's talk about it now. Let's just hit it, right? Let's talk about it now rather than getting all the way to the end and realizing that it was wrong or that something is not going to work. Back to the book. If the problem or opportunity is so big, what has stopped us in the past from doing something about it? And what could stop us in the future? Now, here are 3 ideas that allow you to manage yellow lights effectively. Number 1, you need to realize that red lights are not failure. That's number 1. Failure is making a red light needlessly more expensive. Why? By spending a bunch of time and money doing something knowing that this could be a potential showstopper in the future. That is bad. But red lights don't necessarily mean failure. Number 2, when you encounter a yellow light, slow down. That's why this rule is slow down for yellow lights. If you see it, hear it, feel it, find a way to bring it up, to say it. Tactfully though, right? That's what we're learning as part of this book. Number 3, turn the yellow light to red or green. That is your objective. Oh, I saw a yellow light. Is this a showstopper or can we keep going? Right? You want to turn the yellow lights to red or green. Often, another person's criteria for resolution are less stringent than your own. If they turn the light to green, they're far more convinced than if you convince them. So, I'll give you another example from a project that I was involved with in the past. We had a company that, was online and that wanted essentially a report that was put together for them, a custom RDL report, from Dynamics 365 to be emailed to all of the sales managers every week. So the idea was on Monday when they show up to work, they should have that report on their inbox. That was the request. And immediately, right, that is a yellow light if you think about it. Dynamics doesn't have a way out of the box to email reports like in PDF or whatever. It doesn't do that. Now, if you were using reporting services on premise, there are some ways you can do to make that work. Now, one solution to this problem is you can start thinking about, well, let's talk about this. First of all, you need to slow down for that yellow light, right? And you have to tackle it and say, well, let's talk about this. Is this a deal breaker, right? And if it is a deal breaker, how can we solve it? Now, some technical architect will come up and say, like it happened to me, said, hey, look, what we need to do is we need to take advantage of the dual use rights, have an on-premise implementation, an on-premise Dynamics 365 installation, right? So with a copy of the database, we will use Scribe or Kingsway Soft or whatever to get an exact copy synchronized every night. And then, use the on-premise SQL Server reporting services system to schedule a report. We'll use this third-party application that will actually email the report in PDF version, blah, blah, blah. So they just went on and on and on with like the most complex technical solution you can think of. Then I said, well, what if I send you a link to the report? Would that work? And the customer said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean a link? I want a PDF. And I said, I know, but I can give you a link that when you click on it, the report will be generated, and then you can save as PDF. And I show them on the report itself how to save as PDF. And the best part about this is that when you click on that link, you're going to get the report live from online, number 1. Number 2, the report is going to be with the latest data. It doesn't have to be on Monday, and now you have to wait until the next Monday to get it. If you're on Wednesday afternoon and you feel that you want to see that report for today's sale, because today is, the last day of April or whatever, and you want to see how your sales were today, Wednesday, you can just click on the link and run the report and save it as PDF. You don't have to wait until Monday or whatever it is. And I said that, and they said, well, show me how to do that. I ran the report, executed the report fully, hit F11, which in, your browser will give you the URL of the fully executed report. And then, I emailed them the link. I literally just went to Outlook, new email, pasted the link, click on it. They clicked on it. It opened up. 2 clicks, save to PDF. Yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly what we need. We're good to go. I just converted that yellow light into green within, 10 minutes or whatever it was, rather than making it potentially a red light and a showstopper. So that is one way to address that. Back to the book. Remember the rule for yellow lights. If you see it, hear it, or feel it, find a way to say it tactfully. Slowing down relies on your awareness of what's going on and your choices of what to do about it. One very powerful choice is to state the obvious, hopefully without unneeded emotional charge. Here's a 3-part response that seems to work well. Number 1, I have a concern, or I'm confused, or I think we may have a problem, whatever it is. Just bring it to yourself. I have a concern. Then you state the concern. My concern is that Dynamics 365 out of the box doesn't email reports every week or whatever. There's really no way to do that. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, Power BI can do it. If you have Power BI Pro, you can do it. But in this case, it was a custom RDL report. It wasn't a Power BI report. This was a few years ago. So don't yell at your phone or whatever you're listening this to. Number 3, ask what they think should be done to resolve the yellow light. That is such a powerful move when you ask the question to the customer and say, what do you think we can do instead? Or how can we solve this? Dynamics doesn't do that. How can we solve it? In a lot of cases for me, and this happens to me, I would say daily at this point in projects that I'm implementing, in a lot of cases when we reach a yellow light like this, and I ask the question, what do you think we should do to resolve this? In a lot of cases, it comes back with, you know what, let's just not do it. We're not doing it today. I don't think we need it, whatever. Let's just not do it. It happens a lot where something that seems to be a request, once you bring it up and say, look, this is what we need to do it, but how would you do it? It's, it comes back and says, you know what, just don't worry about it. It's good to go. Now, when you're asking this question, you legitimately have to listen until they feel you understand their point of view. That's the whole idea. So let me give you some examples of yellow lights and how you can effectively slow down for them. And again, some of these are related to something you will find in a project, whether you're on the solution architect side or whether you're on the customer side. It also works like that. So here's a yellow light. A committee may have already decided to allocate resources to something else. This happened to me in projects too, where I think I'm going to have a resource for the duration of the project, and then all of a sudden, there's this other important thing that came up, and they're going to be tied with that. Number 1, again, you're going to be thinking about this. Number 1 is, I'm getting a feeling, and I like to run this by you. I sense that no matter how good my idea is, or even if the business can produce better ROI, the decision has already been made to do something else. Am I off base here? Again, you're just bringing it up and asking the other side what they think. Here's another yellow light. People seem to be unwilling to make a financial commitment. All right. Hey, I'm confused. We said this project could save us tens of millions, but you're only willing to invest tens of thousands? Like, what part of the I in ROI, return of investment, am I missing? We already talked about this. We already saw and we were able to quantify the impact, but yet the company is unwilling to commit $50,000 to invest in something that will save them tens of millions of dollars. It's kind of weird, right? But if you hear the yellow light, like, again, people seem to be unwilling to make the financial commitment, and you just say, I'm just going to move on because this is going to save the company tens of millions, you can run into some issues. Back to the book. When you ignore yellow lights, they do exactly what yellow traffic lights do. They turn red and you're stopped. If you run them, There are all kinds of accidents and risks waiting to happen. Let's get real, or let's not play. Ignoring yellow lights, it's a form of guessing, and you have committed to not guessing. Red lights are not bad. Remember that? They're just red lights. They don't mean you've missed an opportunity. They do mean, though, that you have hit an obstacle, which is, if you leave it unresolved, will mean that it's over. At least you're aware of what's going on and can do something about it. Unfortunately, over, I guess, my time as a entrepreneur, as a solution architect, or as a business owner, I've made some mistakes in terms of yellow lights that I have ignored. I've been on a few projects, for example, that I received verbal commitments from customers, and I learned from those where the customers will say, yeah, we're definitely going to start in February or whatever it is. And then they don't start, something happens, something comes up. Or customers that will say, we're definitely going to go with your organization or your solution or, your timeline, your budget, whatever it is. And then they end up not going with it. That has happened to me several times. And fortunately, because I've read businessThink and because I learned the hard way in the past in a few other ways, I try to avoid those things converting into red lights. I like to bring it up and say, I need something signed. I need something that becomes a green light, or else I'm going to assume that this is going to become a red light for me. And I'm not going to just ignore it and move past, because it happened to me in the past. We had a large implementation. This was a few years ago. Large implementation that was coming with a customer. I visited the customer several times. We talked about the solution several times. It seemed like we were a great fit for each other. And the customer essentially said, like, yeah, that's it. You're it. It's just a matter of signing the paperwork and we're good to go. And I started freeing the time and some of my resources from other projects. I didn't put them on projects. I actually said no to a couple of prospects to start a project because, quote unquote, this other big project was going to happen. And, for the longest time, I think 1 or 2 months or whatever it is, there were 3 or 4 of us who were literally doing nothing, just waiting for that large project to start. And at the end of the day, it never started. At the end of the day, the customer says, you know what, after a whole lot of deliberation and think, whatever, we're just not ready to move forward. We'll let you know when we are ready or whatever it is. But now we have spent months waiting for them and the thing didn't happen, right? So that was one of those situations where I ignored the yellow light and I decided to move forward preparing like if it was a green light, and he came back and bit me, right? So you have to be careful with yellow lights and the whole full speed ahead when there's a yellow light. Driving is another thing. Driving, yeah, floor it. I'm not going to, encourage people to be dangerous when driving, but this is not driving. This is different. This is projects, and you definitely have to slow down for yellow lights. Now, back to the book. If you arrive at the conclusion that the impact of a problem or opportunity is big, a significant question should arise. Question is, what has stopped you from successfully resolving these issues before now? We talked about this question before, right? It's a yellow light, and you need to check it out. If this is a new opportunity with no history, the yellow light question is, what, if anything, might prevent the successful implementation of this solution from going forward? The answer to this question can provide valuable insight. For whatever reason, it is often not asked. And by the way, this is me. I ask this question all the time. There are a couple of variables too. Like, I remember asking this when I interview for jobs too. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't know if it was before I read businessThink, but certainly for years and years and years. One of the questions, how when you go to job interviews, the job interview typically ends with, do you have any questions for me? The person interviewing you is, again, this is me applying for a job. They're interviewing to hire me. And they say, do you have any questions for me? And besides the legit questions I may have, like, whatever questions I have about the company or the team or how they work or whatever it is, I always ask a last question or two. Number one, do you have any reservations that I am, with me being the right fit for this position? I always ask that. I wanted to hear that. I wanted to hear them say either no, and either lie to my face or legitimately say, no, I think I don't have any reservations. I don't have any concerns or anything like that. Or they would say, yes, I do have a concern. You have low experience. You don't have, skills with this. Whatever it is, they would actually tell me why they would have a reservation with me being a good fit for that job. A long time ago, I interviewed for a position where I would be managing, I think it was something like 300 or 400 people. And prior to that, my biggest job as a manager was managing like 3 people, something like that, 3-4 people. And I remember when I did that interview, and there was like multiple rounds of interviews, but I remember when I did that interview, I asked that last question. I said, to the person interviewing me, I said, do you have any concerns with me being the right fit for this job? Or what concerns do you have with me doing this job? Or something along those lines. And she said, yeah, I do. I think that, you've never really managed a big team. And I wasn't going to lie about it and say, like, yeah, I've managed a bunch of people. No. You never really managed a big team. I think actually I was up to about 19 people by that point. But again, it was a big jump from like 19 to 400 or something like that. And she's like, yeah, my concern is that you haven't managed a big team, especially a team with, a decent level of turnover. Because I remember one of the questions they asked me on the meeting was, have you ever fired somebody? And I think that I have fired like 2 people in my life or something like that. And it's always bad. And I don't like it. I've never been a fan of it. Even though, I've always, every time I've tried everything I can to make sure that the position is successful. And when it doesn't work, it's sort of like, okay, like I did everything I could and I don't feel super bad about it. I think it's the right decision at that point to let them go. But again, I had fired like 2 people at that time or something like that. And they said, that's going to happen like on a monthly basis or whatever it is with 400 people. So she was very, very honest with me and said, the only reservation, I think that in terms of knowledge and culture and, personality and skills and all of that, you're perfect. But in terms of experience managing a large group of people and dealing with, turnover and all of that, you don't have the experience. And the fact that she said that was so valuable to me. And that was on the first interview, and I still went through like 3 or 4 interviews, but she knew at that point that I knew what her concerns were. And obviously I was willing to learn or train or whatever, earn my way up to that. At the end, I didn't end up getting the job, and it was great. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, because of all the reasons. But it was really good to ask that question. Another question I asked, just for you writing notes on this, if you're going through a job interview or if you, let's say, recently went independent and you're going to potential, people that can hire you to be a contractor or whatever it is I always like to ask, why are you talking to me? Like, why am I here? Or, something like that, a variable of that. And typically what that does is that it forces people interviewing you to think about the good and positive things of why they invited you, why they're calling you. No one wants to meet with a bunch of people, especially if they know they're not going to be a good fit. So the fact that you're there, going through an interview, a job interview, means that they saw something on you that is valuable or saw something that could potentially make it work for that particular position. So because of that, I like to ask, like, why am I here? And the answer is always going to be focusing on positive things, not negative things. And when you leave the interview, they will be, again, you're leaving in kind of in good terms. They're thinking about all the good things. You're forcing them to think about all the good things that you have and the reasons why you're there, rather than leaving on, kind of a negative angle. So those 2 questions are questions that I always ask. And it's kind of like the same principle of, what is it? The question we were just talking about, what has stopped you from successfully resolving these issues before, or what if anything might prevent the successful implementation of this solution going forward? I want to hear that. And back to the book. The answer to this question can provide valuable insight. For whatever reason, it is often not asked, as I mentioned before. And yellow lights can reveal obstacles and barriers from the past that no longer exist, which is a good thing, right? They might say something like, well, we used to have a head of a department who's a Salesforce fan, and he always declined us moving from Salesforce to Dynamics or whatever it is, but that guy left, and now we have somebody who it's been working with Dynamics forever. Great, that's good to hear. You didn't have a budget before, and now you do. Great, that's awesome. You didn't have the various approvals, and now you do. Awesome. It wasn't a top priority, and now it is. All those things are great, right? Or maybe they stopped us in the past and nothing has changed. That's also important to hear. Maybe not great to hear, but it's important to hear. Let's say the answer is to your question of what has stopped you guys from doing this in the past. You hear something like, well, we've never been able to get this adequately budgeted. They've never given us the money to do it. That's something that is important to know, because that immediately tells you also that you could be following that problem and you should probably do something about it. Maybe you'll hear something like, well, we can't get buy-in from the executive committee or the executives or leadership. Well, you better get that commitment, right, when you're implementing your solution. The XYZ group has vested interest in killing it. Well, why? Go find out and make sure that's not the case. Politics has always gotten in the way. It's been too complicated. We've had higher priorities. Like, those questions are not as good as we didn't have budget before, but now we do. Like, those are great things to hear, but they are important to hear because we live in the real world, right? So, if you hear something like that, you know two things. Number one, the impact is big, and there is something real in front of you that can stop you from getting the impact you want. The question you ask is, what's different this time? So let's say you had, I don't know, we can't get buy-in from the executives. Okay, so what do you think is going to be different this time around? Why do you think this time around is going to actually work? If nothing is different, it's likely that nothing will be different after you implement it. So it is crucial to understand what blocked the solution in the past that might block it again. Hitting one of these roadblocks is a yellow light. You can do something like this. I have a concern. It sounds like even if we come up with the best possible solution, even if it really gets the results we discuss, it won't be adopted. You mentioned that politics has killed it in the past, and it's probably going to do it this time too. Why do you think we should do it? The impact is big, and you won't make the best business decision possible unless the constraints are removed. If the constraints cannot be removed, can they be managed or circumvented? If not, do you even want to proceed? No. Of course, the answer is no. The reason is vulnerability. Your solution won't be adopted, and even if it is adopted, the implementation of the solution will suffer. That's something that you need to keep in mind. Super, super important. And to wrap up, and I think that, up to this point, we've had a lot of super valuable information in terms of how to be a better solution architect and keep on digging into the real reasons of why a solution is needed and how can we eliminate the pain that some teams are going through. I think that if there's a theme over the last two episodes, and certainly in this book, is communication. It's how to talk to people. And one of the things that has created the most benefits for me is to understand that when you ask a question, typically the first answer that you get is never the answer that you're after, right? And that is why asking the why is so valuable, and why you should continue to ask why and why and why. And why is that? And why? And why? Why do you guys do it that way? And why is that? Right? Ask it so many times because it's what will uncover where you need to get to. So we're going to finish this episode with rule number 8, which is finding the cause. Find the cause of your solution. So back to the book. Here's a story we've heard many times in many places and settings that illustrates the power of digging for the why. By the way, let me stop right here. This is such a good story, and until I read the book, I've never heard this story before. They make it sound like, they tell this story in a bunch of places, but I've never heard it before. Maybe you have, but maybe you're hearing it for the first time. But it's such a good story because it illustrates so good what being curious and being a, consistent and committed solution architect, is, and what difference, we can make. So let's talk about this. The story goes like this. Years ago, at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Department of Parks and Recreation had a problem. By the way, Jefferson is the third president of the United States, and, we made a memorial a few decades ago. So for those of you who are listening to this overseas, this is a memorial to the third president of the United States. All right, back to the book. The stones of the Jefferson Memorial were deteriorating badly, and it was giving the maintenance people fits. So they were, pretty upset. Meanwhile, tourists were complaining that the memorial was in disrepair or was being neglected. Here is the list of the original issues. Or here's the original list of issues, rather. Number 1, the memorial stone is deteriorating. Number 2, tourists are complaining. Number 3, maintenance workers are spending too much time cleaning the stones. Number 4, image of the monument is not up to standards. Especially if you've been in Washington, D.C., you know that the memorials there are amazing, right? Number 5, costs are up from cleaning supplies and materials. We're having to do it more often. Cleaning supplies are more expensive. The maintenance workers are upset. Tourists are complaining. This is a disaster. Now, imagine you're the director, or if you will, the solution architect to this particular issue. This is the pain that you're hearing, right? The solution that you come up with may seem pretty obvious. Replace the stones, right? It sounds super simple. After all, the monument was built in 1943. I mean, almost 80 years ago at this point. And it's about time to refurbish the old memorial. Now, again, this is where the difference between an event architect, as we talked about it on episode 1, when solutions are not providing business value, they're just events. So if you're an event architect, or if you are, up-and-coming solution architect, I would say, here is where the difference comes. And here is where you take it to the next level and become that world-class solution architect. Check this out. Once you find out that the grounds crew, is cleaning the stones all the time, there are a number of possible solutions you could apply to the problem. Again, the idea is this thing was built like 80 years ago. And when you ask why the stones are deteriorating, maybe you discover that it's probably because that grounds crew has to clean them more frequently, right? It's often just, they're often just cleaning this thing, and that's why they're complaining that the costs are going up for the cleaning supplies and materials. So once you find out they're cleaning them more often, world-class solution architect would say, well, but why is it? Why are we doing that? Right? Why can we have a solution for that? So if you have to clean them more often, can we perhaps use less abrasive cleaners? Can we perhaps use less harsh chemicals to clean the rock? Can we replace the stones so less cleaning is needed? Obviously, back to our original solution. That could be a solution as well. Can we live with it and just explain to the tourists that, look, it's just an old monument. It's just an old building. What do you want me to do, right? That's also a solution. But why stop there, right? We are world-class solution architects, so we have to take it to the next level. You have to think about the rest of the company, if you will. And in this case, for this example, you're thinking about other monuments, Other monuments have the same stones in Washington, D.C., and those monuments aren't deteriorating or they're in need of constant cleaning. So you should ask yourself why. Why are we cleaning the Jefferson Memorial all the time? Now, the answer may come back and say, well, there's pigeons who frequently visit the stones on the memorial and are leaving too many, calling cards, let's just say. And you say, pigeons, that's why we're cleaning them as often. So maybe we can get rid of the pigeons, right? Figure out a way, kill the pigeons or something, keep them away. And that way the memorial doesn't get destroyed and we don't have to clean it as often and the rock can last longer. That's good. So once again, even if you're, replacing the rock, which sounds like the easy solution, you have to think about the future as well. But then why stop there with the pigeons? You should ask, well, what's up with all the pigeons? Why are they coming to this memorial and not to the other memorials, right? That's a good question to ask. Why? Well, you know what? They feed on the heavy spider population. Cool. Spider population. No problem. I got a solution for that. Why am I paying all these people instead of just, hitting the dove factor and buy some bug spray and get rid of all the spiders? If you get rid of the spiders, you get rid of the birds. And if the birds are gone, the droppings are gone. And if the droppings are gone, no more frequent cleansing. And that's it. Problem solved, right? The solution will be fast, will be immediate, and temporary and premature at the same time, right? Because you stop asking the why. Why are there so many spiders? Oh, the spiders are attracted to the huge moth population. There's a bunch of moths around the memorial. Of course. But you know what? If we buy that insecticide for the spiders, it will also clean the moths. So two birds with one stone, that's easy, right? The problem is, the downside to this solution is that maybe the chemicals could also damage the stones even more, that insecticide that you're implementing. And besides, who wants to smell all the chemicals that you're using to kill those spiders and moths? Couldn't you affect the tourists too and the maintenance workers who are there frequently? It would be easy to say, we'll just have to live with those downsides. But the question is, if you get rid of all the insects, the problem is solved, right? Wrong. Why are all the moths? Well, the moths are attracted by the monument's light during their twilight swarming period. Oh, the lights. So at this point, you've discovered the cause. Why are the moths attracted to the light? Who knows? It's just in their DNA. That's what moths do. So you just know they're attracted to the lights, and that's causing a chain reaction of events. Once you've hit the why, mother lode, in terms, right, with the lights, think about the solution and play them out. So what would be the solution to the problem that the monument is decaying and all of that? Turn on the lights 2 hours later. Get rid of the early lights, and you get rid of the of most of the moths. Not all the moths, right? But no moths mean no spiders. Getting rid of the spiders, say goodbye to the pigeons. Get rid of the pigeons, and you save the stones from becoming pigeons' personal restrooms. Not only that, you save money on the light bill or the power bill, and all the premature solutions have been avoided and haven't caused other problems. Asking why took time, but the solution you've chosen has a better likelihood of addressing the causes than any other solution along the way that you could have chosen. Just, the idea behind asking the why in this case is such a good example of how a solution architect should work. It's not just about taking the first answer, like, okay, the stones are messed up because we clean them more often. Cool, get new stones. That is a big mistake that I used to make all the time when I started as a solution architect, and that I try never to do now. I always like to look for that, we call it the mother lode of, reasons, essentially, of why this is happening, and try to fix it at the root. Now, that typically saves a lot of money, saves a lot of pain. In the Jefferson Memorial case, they had the evidence, they knew the impact, they had enough reason to find a solution, And, without the why, the solution would have been premature, right? And would have caused more problems. You replace it, you get new rock. The pigeons are still there messing up. You still have to clean it. You still have the problems, even though the solutions seem pretty evident. So this is what this book is about. This is why it's so important for you to exercise those muscles as a solution architect and look for the right solution. If you want to get started on finding the cost, here's how you move to the why. So 3 things. Number 1, when you originally moved off the solution, you made a list of issues. Take the highest priority item from that list of issues and ask why that particular thing is happening. In the example, imagine that most important issues on the list was, like in our example, the stones on the monuments were deteriorating. Make a why list of all the things that could contribute to causing the stones to deteriorate, right? So you write it, that's the problem, here's why that's happening. Now you take the most important cause from that list and you make another list of whys for that one. So why are the stones deteriorating? There's a list. The most important one is because the maintenance workers are cleaning them more often. Why is that? Then you have another list of reasons. And you keep going until you hit the most important why on your list of issues, whatever many levels that will take. In the book, it says, in our experience, it usually takes 3 to 5 times, or 5 levels if you want to think about it, of asking why to identify the real cause. You'll need to be persistent to keep asking why with the right intent until you're confident you identify the real cause. So again, you'll need to be persistent to keep asking why with the right intent until you are confident you have identified the real cause. So once again, you may have to do that several times. Why is the rock deteriorating? They're cleaning it more often. Why is that? Because there's pigeon. Why are there pigeons? Because of spiders. Why are there spiders? Because of moths. Why are there moths? Because of lights. Aha! Bingo. That is the real reason why. If we deal with the lights, we will fix all of those other problems that we talked about and all of those whys that we talked about until now. And that is where I'm going to end the episode. So just to do a recap of the rules that we talked about in the previous episode. Rule number 1, check your ego at the door. You've checked your ego maybe several times and work delicately with the egos of others to keep the dialogue open. Rule number 2, create curiosity. You've entered discussions with a healthy energy for asking questions and have temporarily set aside your own knowledge and expertise as you have gathered other perspective from your company collective intellectual diversity. Rule number 3, move off the solution. Rather than prematurely focusing on the solution itself, you move off the solution to get to the underlying business issues, carefully making sure you're not guessing, remember that, and focus your attention on the vital few issues. Rule number 4, get evidence. You've gathered proof that the business problem or opportunity exists by collecting soft evidence. And then turning that soft evidence into hard evidence that the business can measure. That's how we ended the last episode. This episode, rule number 5, calculate the impact. In order to determine that this is a should and not a could, just the fact that you could do it doesn't mean you should do it. Remember that. You've covered hard evidence into a financial equivalent to make sure that there is a worthwhile impact or payoff. Rule number 6, explore the ripple effect. You've carefully considered who or what else in the company is affected by the problem or the opportunity. You've also considered the relative weight of the importance of this issue compared with other initiatives within the company. Rule number 7, slow down for yellow lights. You know what has stopped the company from successfully doing something about this before now and what may stop you in the future. And finally, rule number 8, find the cause. You've identified the cause producing the symptoms that are showing up, and you're convinced the solution will treat the cause of the problem rather than just the effects. And that, my friends, is businessThink. I hope that, going through those and kind of visiting some ways in which I've encountered this in projects in the past and, kind of life experiences and situations, gave you some perspective, something that you can take to be a better solution architect, better functional consultant, better admin, better project manager, salesperson, entrepreneur, whatever it is. 100%, 200% recommend this book for you to buy it and to read through it. There's so much that I didn't cover. Every one of the different rules that we cover has a little test. Like, how do you know if your ego is acting up, for example? And they will have a test. Like, you answer the questions, and at the end, it will tell you, like, yeah, this is your ego acting. Or you're successfully able to check your ego out the door, whatever it is. It's such a great book, and I cannot recommend it enough. Also, if you have any questions or comments about this episode, feel free to drop us a line at info@crmmbpodcast.com. I'm trying my best to answer every email. Thank you so much for your encouragement and suggestions and questions about our previous episodes. You can also leave us a comment at crmmbpodcast.com. 2 weeks from now, we'll have another episode with an exciting topic, of course. Hopefully, you'll tune in by then. But for now, thank you so much for sticking with me over this last 2 episodes. Hopefully, you enjoyed the book and you learned some good lessons. And we'll see you on the next one.